Big landowners in Brazil continue to fuel fires in the Amazon with impunity. Over 200 delegates from around the world meet for the first patriotic forum being held in Haiti. And the Palestinian president laments U.S. actions impeding peace in the Middle East. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Camila Escalante. We begin in Brazil, where the Amazon continues to burn despite a brief reprieve because of rainfall. It's becoming ever more clear that the government of Jair Bolsonaro's lack of action is due to the interests of the land-owning political class, which is bloc backing his social liberal party. Our correspondent in Rondônia, Brian Muir, has this report.
Now, we had a couple days in which it rained a little bit in the late afternoon in Porto Velho and Rondônia in southern Amazonas, and there was a lowering of the amount of fires, but it's drying out again and they're starting up. Greenpeace is saying that fires are going out of control in Pará right now, and the soy farmers and the ranchers are starting fires in southern Amazonas. So President Jair Bolsonaro today said he's going to shift military operations into the south of Amazonas. But at the same time, it doesn't seem like they're going after the people who are hiring chainsaw crews and hiring people to start these fires, because it's the big cattle ranchers and soy farmers behind all of this. If the Air Force is just arresting poor people with cans of gasoline who are getting paid $30 to start a fire, it's not going to stop anything. So it doesn't seem like they're really attacking the root of the problem, and a symbol of that is something that a local journalist told me today. She called up the fire department to learn about their plan for fighting the fires in Rondônia, and she got a message back from them that the plan is called Forest Fire 17. Now 17 is the campaign number of Jair Bolsonaro's PSL party, and the governor is a member of this party. So at the same time that they're saying they're putting out forest fires, they're campaigning for the politicians who basically started all the fires, because the main support base for the PSL party are the Ruralista bloc, the big ranchers and the big soy plantation owners who are causing all of these problems.
And you can follow our correspondent Brian Muir, who's covering the fires in the Amazon, on his Twitter at Brian M. Telesur. Now, moving on, contrary to the Brazilian government's response, the president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, has said that treasury funds will be used to recover the Amazon rainforest following the fires ravaging the region. He also called for businesses from a range of sectors to put together a recovery plan.
When we work together, bringing our experiences, sharing what we've lived, we give hope to future generations, especially in looking after the environment. That's why I've called together businesses across all social sectors to see how we can put together a recovery program following these fires in order to get back what we've lost.
And the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is expressing serious concern about the Amazon fires as he appeals for international mobilization in support of the rainforest. The UN chief was speaking to reporters on the sidelines of the Tokyo International Conference on African Development.
I believe that the international community needs to be strongly mobilizing to support the Amazon countries in order to do these two things. Stop the fires as quickly as possible with all possible means, and then have a consistent reforestation policy. Until now, obviously, we have not done enough. We need to do altogether much more than what we have done in the past. The UN has been quite engaged in relation to our country teams are supporting the governments in this respect. We are strongly appealing for the mobilization of resources, and we have been in contact with the countries in order to see whether during the high-level session of the General Assembly there could be a meeting devoted to the mobilization of support to the Amazon.
Moving on to Venezuela, President Nicolas Maduro says that he is working to restart dialogue with the opposition. He was speaking to the Chinese agency Xinhua. Venezuela had put the talks on hold after the U.S. government ordered more sanctions against the country, and the opposition supported them.
I can tell you that we have reestablished contact with the Norwegian government. There have been several meetings, and we have made contact again with the delegates of the Venezuelan opposition. And I have proposed that we create a permanent mechanism of dialogue, a permanent forum for talks, that is able to overcome any turmoil, any obstacle, any situation. We want dialogue, dialogue, dialogue for peace.
Our correspondent in Caracas, Leonel Ratamel, has the details.
During an exclusive interview with the Chinese media outlet Xinhua, the president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, said that he is looking to restart talks with the opposition through the mechanism put together by the government of Norway. The talks had been suspended by the Venezuelan government because of the intensification of coercive unilateral measures imposed on the country by the United States on August 5th. However, President Maduro signaled that after some adjustments, the government is trying to get the talks active again, and that advances will be revealed in the coming days. The talks have been ongoing since May this year, and in its fifth meeting was suspended due to the United States' direct interference. This happened in the middle of the Venezuelan People's Campaign against the U.S. intervention. The No More Trump campaign is collecting signatures and is hoping to reach 13 million before being delivered to the United Nations.
In neighboring Colombia, a group of FARC leaders has announced that they are returning to armed struggle. The group includes the FARC Senator Jesus Santrich, who abandoned his security detail and disappeared several weeks ago. It also includes Ivan Marquez, who was the lead negotiator for the FARC in the peace talks with the government, which led to the signing of the peace accord in 2016. They made their announcement in a video from an undisclosed location. The group says it is forced to take up arms again because the Colombian government has refused to implement the peace agreement reached in Havana. It says its target will not be soldiers or the military as such, but the Colombian oligarchy.
Since the signing of the peace agreement in Havana and the ingenious disarming of the guerrillas in exchange for nothing, the killing hasn't stopped. In 2 years, more than 500 leaders of social movements have been murdered and more than 150 guerrillas have been killed, while the state remains indifferent and does nothing. When we signed the Havana Accord, we did it in the conviction that it is possible to change the lives of the humble and the dispossessed, but the state has not fulfilled even its most fundamental duty, to protect the life of its citizens, and in particular, to prevent murders for political reasons.
The president of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, Patricia Linares, said that the move to rearm constitutes a threat to the peace process.
The news that some members of the FARC are rearming in secrecy shows a failure to comply with the integral system of truth, justice, reparation, and non-repetition. It falls in the remit of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace and without doubt constitutes a grave act for the peace process, which with difficult and great sacrifice has been ongoing in this country. Constructing peace after half a century of internal conflict is difficult, and a path of full uncertainties and doubts. However, the parties have complied with their commitments.
Our correspondent Jose Manuel Jimenez has more from Bogotá.
Reactions are flooding into this announcement by the FARC dissidents, most of them expressing support for the peace process, support for those ex-guerrillas who signed a peace agreement with the Colombian state, support for defending this process which benefits most of the Colombian people. You'll remember that when the peace agreement was put to a referendum for ratification, those who voted in favor were especially those in the communities most affected by the armed conflict for more than 50 years, the indigenous people, the Afro-Colombian community, campesinos. They are the ones who said most clearly, we are in favor of the peace process, we don't want any more war. And many political figures have been saying that this needs to be protected and defended. They say it's necessary to demand that President Ivan Duque gives proper funding to the peace agreement, protects the areas where former combatants are gathered. That, they say, is the only way of blocking this new attempt to form a guerrilla organization of the FARC, as announced by Ivan Marquez, Jesus Santrich, and El Paisa. There are have also been reactions from the far right. The former President Alvaro Uribe said we have to remove these agreements from the Constitution and capture these bandits wherever they are. Another right-wing senator referred to the refusal to grant the 16 seats in Congress for the victims of the armed conflict. And that refusal by Uribe's Democratic Center Party has meant that the victims still don't have the recognition they were promised in the peace deal. This is a government that has also refused to recognize the murders and disappearances that have continued at an alarming rate. We should also remember that the peace accords have been recognized internationally, endorsed by the UN Security Council and the International Court in The Hague. But this government has repeatedly refused to stand by these international agreements by failing to finance the agreements and pushing the former guerrillas into a corner. Nonetheless, the FARC political party insists it will continue to struggle for peace through political democratic means.
Still to come, we check up on Hurricane Dorian as it passes through the Caribbean. Stay with us. Welcome back. Over 200 delegates from around the world have met for the first patriotic forum in Haiti. Campesinos, rice activists, and trade unionists from countries including Venezuela, Brazil, and South Africa, and the United States gathered to discuss global, social, and political crises. They're debating the consequences of capitalism as well as U.S. intervention and sanctions. Taking place until August 31st, one of the main points of the event's agenda is Haiti's political struggle with President Jovenel Moïse. Staying in the Caribbean, Hurricane Dorian is getting stronger as it sets its sights on the Bahamas and the U.S. mainland. It is expected to make landfall as a major hurricane soon. The National Hurricane Center's latest intensity forecast calls for Dorian to become a dangerous Category 4 hurricane as early as Friday. On its current track, Dorian should move over the Atlantic and onto the Bahamas within the next 24 to 48 hours. Forecasters say that the hurricane is intensifying rapidly as it tears through the Atlantic, and it already has a higher peak intensity than in previous forecasts. Meanwhile, the Federal Emergency Management Agency deployed over 3,000 people in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Puerto Rico is still living the effects of Hurricane Maria, which hit in 2017, as well as the U.S. government's failure to adequately respond to the disaster. We shift to South Africa now, where police arrested 17 people in connection with the looting of foreign-owned shops in the capital, Pretoria, on Wednesday. A police statement said that 10 people were arrested for being in possession of stolen property, while 7 have been detained for public violence. Business premises belonging to foreigners were attacked on Wednesday by violent mobs after a Nigerian national allegedly shot a South African bus driver. In neighboring Zimbabwe, the government has urged the European Union to remove the illegal sanctions it imposed on Zimbabwe before speaking about human rights. Launching an anti-corruption campaign in Harare, the Zimbabwean Minister of Justice said it was unfair for the EU to talk about human rights while it is violating ordinary people's rights by maintaining illegal sanctions on Zimbabwe. The US and the EU are maintaining a decades-old economic blockade on the country, despite calls by most African countries to have it lifted.
Cannot respect the rights of the citizens of Zimbabwe when sanctions are still there. So I want to call upon my brother as we launch the anti-corruption campaign to say that corruption and sanctions go hand in hand. When you have sanctions, you are bound to have shortages. And when you have shortages, those little corruption that my brother, Honorable PG, was talking about, they will start sprouting. So I urge him to reconsider the rights of the poor citizens of Zimbabwe and become an advocate of the anti-sanctions drive.
Traveling over to West Africa, a Liberian ruling party candidate won a seat in the latest by-elections held on Wednesday. Abu Bana Kamara of the Coalition for Democratic Change was declared the winner of Monrovia District seat by the National Electoral Commission after obtaining 49% against his closest opponents, 39%. Legislative elections in the district were first held in July, and the results were contested, leading to a return to the polls. The election victory has further strengthened the ruling party's representation in the country's parliament. And Japan and Africa are set to strengthen their ties during the ongoing Africa Aid Forum in Tokyo. Several African leaders are in Japan attending the forum aimed at boosting ties with the Asian country. The Tokyo International Conference on African Development aims, among other issues, to drive Africa's growth through high-quality infrastructure development, science, technology, and innovation exchange. The forum kicked off on Wednesday and is scheduled to close on Friday.
And that the regulatory environment should be so well aligned with being able to attract businesses to come into our countries. And we should cut red tape. And we should focus on attracting foreign investments. Now, Japan is invested in a number of our countries on the continent, and we want them to continue doing so.
After the break, we hear from British Labour Party MP Chris Williamson about the suspension of Parliament. Stay with us. Welcome back. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas met with German Chancellor Angela Merkel on an official visit to the European country. The two leaders are discussing the latest political developments in Palestine. Over the past week, Israel has ratcheted up tensions in the Middle East by increasing its offensive military operations, bombing Palestine, Lebanon, Iraq, and Syria.
We will, of course, talk about the situation in the Palestine region, and we will also do that with a good basis, particularly on the basis that a political solution must come that leads to results that Palestinians and Israelis can live together in peace and safety. In our opinion, that is only possible through a two-state agreement between the conflicting parties under the consideration of internationally agreed upon parameters. That must be the goal as before.
The Palestinian president called for European and international assistance in negotiating with Israel, adding that the current U.S. administration is actively impeding peace.
Regretfully, the U.S. administration is not helpful in establishing peace and safety in our region by wanting to exclude issues such as Jerusalem, refugees, borders, housing development and security from the negotiations. International institutions are being replaced and measures implemented which are in objection to the reference foundation developed by the international community. That's why we call for international accompaniment in the negotiations on the basis of what I suggested to the UN Security Council, a Middle East quartet with European and Arab states to accompany negotiations between us and Israel.
Staying in Europe, the leader of the British opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, has condemned the Prime Minister's attempts to circumvent Parliament in order to assure a no-deal Brexit from the European Union. Corbyn highlighted the consequences that such a departure would have on trade, jobs, and the north of Ireland's border with the Republic of Ireland.
We will be back in Parliament on Tuesday to challenge Boris Johnson on what I think is a smash and grab raid against our democracy, where he's trying to suspend Parliament in order to prevent a serious discussion and a serious debate to prevent a no-deal Brexit. What we're going to do is try to politically stop him on Tuesday with a parliamentary process in order to legislate to prevent a no-deal Brexit, and also to try and prevent him shutting down Parliament during this utterly crucial period.
The left-wing Labour Member of Parliament, Chris Williamson, spoke to Telesur about what Boris Johnson is doing with his suspension of Parliament.
Well, I think he's trying to minimise parliamentary scrutiny of his plans to basically get the UK out of the European Union. And by proroguing Parliament in the way that he has, means that Parliament will not be able to sit for a longer period than would normally be the case during the conference season. So that minimises, I think, the ability of MPs to scrutinise what he's doing and try and avoid a no-deal Brexit. There is a lot of opposition to that. And by ensuring that Parliament can't sit, it means that Boris Johnson will not be subjected to the level of scrutiny that he would normally expect to see. Labour's seeking to try to get a deal which works in the interests of the British people, but there are, views within the Labour Party do differ. I mean, there are some people who would be happy for Britain to leave the European Union. Others, obviously, are very concerned about it. But I think where we're united is that we want to try and ensure that we get the best possible outcome for the British people. And so that's why I think a lot of effort is going into trying to ensure that Britain doesn't leave the European Union without a deal. But whether we do or whether we don't leave with or without a deal, the key thing is, what is our vision for Britain beyond the membership of the European Union? And that's where I think a socialist alternative, the sort of proposition that Jeremy Corbyn won the Labour leadership on to try and transform Britain, is the key issue, really, because whether we are in or out of the European Union with the Conservatives still in power, we'll continue to see inequality increasing and poverty continuing to rise in this country, and obviously that is not in the interest of the vast majority of the British public, and obviously that's why we want to ensure that we get a general election in order to try and change the government. Now, I do think British democracy is under the microscope right now, and I think that some people argue that Boris Johnson is abusing the democratic processes in the United Kingdom, but I do think we need to do a lot more to improve democracy anyway. I mean, parliamentary democracy goes so far, and I think what we should be doing is looking at how we can democratise still further our country to give more ability at a local level for communities to have a greater say over their own destiny. And so that means, if you like, more localism, more ability of local authorities and regional areas in the country to determine what is important for them. So I think democracy at the moment in Britain is as I say, under the scrutiny, is under the microscope, not really necessarily serving the interests of the British people, and that's why I've ended up with a situation where 14 million people are living in poverty in the fifth biggest economy in the world. And that's why I think we do need a very severe look at the way in which democracy is operating in Britain to ensure that it's working in the interests of everybody rather than just the privileged elite at the top of society.
And we end in Beijing, where Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif has emphasized support from China, Russia, and European countries in implementing the 2015 nuclear deal during an interview with China's Central Television. He said that Tehran will only countenance the US's participation in talks if it stops harassing countries from engaging in normal economic activity with Iran.
We have two options. One is for President Trump to abandon his approach and agree to rejoin those who are implementing the agreement, or for Europe and the rest of JCPOA participants, including China and Russia, to continue with implementing their obligations under JCPOA. And we were focusing mostly on the second, while President Macron also wanted the possibility of bringing the United States back into compliance. And we informed him what would be the requirements, that is, for the United States to stop harassing other countries from engaging in normal economic activity with Iran.
We've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at tellusenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Our English, I'm Camilla Escalante. Thanks for watching.